When King Solomon died, he left behind more than just a kingdom. He left behind treasures so magnificent, so divinely inspired, that their very existence seemed to blur the line between the earthly and the heavenly. Gold beyond imagination, sacred vessels that had touched the presence of God Himself, precious stones that caught light like captured starfire. But here's the question that has haunted archaeologists, treasure hunters, and biblical scholars for nearly 3,000 years. Where did it all go? Did these priceless artifacts simply vanish into the mists of history? Were they systematically looted by conquering armies? Or could they still be hidden somewhere, waiting in secret chambers beneath Jerusalem, protected by ancient guardians who knew their true worth? Tonight, we're diving deep into one of history's greatest mysteries, the lost treasures of Solomon's Temple. And I'm warning you right now, what we're about to uncover will challenge everything you thought you knew about biblical archaeology. If this mystery grips you the way it's gripped me, drop a Y in the comments. And make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this investigation spans multiple episodes, and you won't want to miss a single revelation. Trust me, by the time we're finished, you'll see why this isn't just about lost gold. It's about lost history, lost faith, and a treasure hunt that's still happening today. Let's begin with what we know for certain. And honestly, what we know for certain is both breathtaking and heartbreaking. Solomon's Temple wasn't just a building. It was a masterpiece of divine architecture, a structure so magnificent that even today's most ambitious architects would struggle to comprehend its grandeur. The Bible gives us tantalizing details that read like something from a fever dream of unlimited wealth. The inner sanctuary was overlaid with pure gold. 600 talents of gold, according to the scriptures. That's roughly 25 tons of gold covering the walls, the floors, the ceiling. Imagine walking into a room where every surface gleamed with precious metal, where the very air seemed to shimmer with divine radiance. But the gold was just the beginning. The temple housed sacred vessels crafted with such precision and beauty that they were considered worthy to hold the presence of the Almighty. The golden lampstand, or menorah, with its 7 branches reaching toward heaven like golden arms stretched in worship. The Table of Showbread, where 12 loaves representing the 12 tribes of Israel were placed before God in perpetual offering. The altar of incense, where sweet-smelling smoke rose like prayers made visible. And then there was the Holy of Holies, the most sacred space on earth, separated by a veil so thick it would take multiple men to move it. Inside this inner sanctuary sat the Ark of the Covenant, not just a golden box, but the earthly throne of God Himself, covered in pure gold, topped with 2 cherubim whose wings stretched across its surface. Inside the ark lay the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, Aaron's rod that had budded, and a golden pot containing manna from the wilderness. This wasn't just furniture. This was the physical manifestation of God's presence on earth. The sheer value of these treasures defies calculation. We're talking about artifacts that represented not just monetary worth, but spiritual power beyond anything the ancient world had ever seen. Kings traveled thousands of miles just to glimpse Solomon's wisdom and wealth. The Queen of Sheba herself declared that not even half of Solomon's splendor had been told to her. But here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Because for all its glory, for all its divine protection, Solomon's temple was not destined to last forever. The year was approximately 587 BCE. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, under the ruthless leadership of King Nebuchadnezzar II, had set its sights on Jerusalem. This wasn't just another military campaign. This was systematic conquest designed to break the spirit of a nation and plunder its greatest treasures. The siege lasted 30 brutal months. 30 months of starvation, desperation, and mounting terror as the greatest empire in the world slowly tightened its grip around the holy city. When the walls finally fell, what followed was methodical devastation. The Babylonians didn't just conquer Jerusalem. They dismantled it piece by piece, stone by stone. And at the center of their attention was Solomon's temple and its unimaginable wealth. The biblical accounts paint a picture of systematic looting that's both precise and heartbreaking. 2 Kings tells us that Nebuchadnezzar carried off all the treasures from the house of the Lord and the royal palace. He cut into pieces all the gold articles that Solomon had made for the temple. Think about that for a moment. These weren't just valuable objects being stolen. These were sacred vessels, crafted under divine inspiration, being hacked apart like scrap metal. The bronze pillars that stood at the temple entrance, each one 18 cubits high and 12 cubits in circumference, were broken up and carried away. The bronze sea, a massive basin that could hold thousands of gallons of water for ritual purification, was shattered and transported to Babylon in pieces. Every golden bowl, every silver vessel, every bronze implement was cataloged, packed, and shipped eastward to fill the treasuries of a foreign god. But here's what's truly staggering about this account. The Babylonians were meticulous record keepers. They documented everything they took, everything except one crucial item. The Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object in the temple, the very throne of God on earth, is never mentioned in their inventory, not once. This silence has haunted scholars for centuries. How do you lose track of the most important religious artifact in human history? How does something that powerful, that sacred, simply disappear from the historical record? The Babylonians took golden spoons and bronze shovels, but somehow missed the Ark of the Covenant? It doesn't make sense. Unless, of course, it was never there for them to find. This is where our investigation takes its first mysterious turn. Because if the Ark wasn't captured by the Babylonians, then where was it? Was it hidden? Destroyed? Spirited away to some secret location by faithful priests who knew the end was coming? The possibilities are as intriguing as they are endless. Some scholars believe the Ark was concealed in a secret chamber beneath the Temple Mount before the Babylonian invasion. Others suggest it was carried south to Ethiopia, where it remains to this day in a church in Aksum, guarded by a single priest who has sworn never to let it see daylight again. Still others think it lies buried somewhere in the Judean wilderness, waiting for the right time, the right person, the right divine moment to be revealed. But the mystery deepens when we consider what happened next. Because this story doesn't end with the Babylonian conquest. It takes another dramatic turn when we examine what the Persian king Cyrus did nearly 50 years later. In one of history's most remarkable acts of cultural restitution, Cyrus the Great issued a decree that changed everything. The Jewish exiles could return to Jerusalem. The temple could be rebuilt. And here's the part that will make your head spin. Cyrus ordered that the temple treasures taken by Nebuchadnezzar be returned to Jerusalem. The book of Ezra records this moment with stunning detail. Cyrus brought out the articles belonging to the temple of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem and had placed in the temple of his God. King Cyrus gave these articles to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah, who carried them back to Jerusalem for the rebuilt temple. The inventory is staggering: 30 gold dishes, 1,000 silver dishes, 29 silver pans, 30 gold bowls, 410 silver bowls of a second kind, 1,000 other articles. In all, there were 5,400 articles of gold and silver that Sheshbazzar brought up with the exiles from Babylon to Jerusalem. But wait, if these treasures were returned, if they made their way back to Jerusalem and were placed in the Second Temple, then what happened to them next? Because here's the thing, those treasures vanished again. And this time, the story becomes even more complex, even more intriguing, and even more mysterious. The Second Temple stood for nearly 600 years. 6 centuries of worship, sacrifice, and pilgrimage. 6 centuries during which those returned treasures sat in the rebuilt sanctuary, once again serving their sacred purpose. But in 70 CE, history repeated itself with even greater brutality. The Roman legions, under the command of the future Emperor Titus, besieged Jerusalem with a ferocity that made the Babylonian conquest look merciful. When the city fell, the Romans didn't just loot the temple, they burned it to the ground. And this time, they documented their victory with artistic precision. The Arch of Titus, which still stands in Rome today, depicts Roman soldiers carrying the temple treasures through the streets of the Eternal City. You can see the golden menorah, the Table of Showbread, the silver trumpets, all being paraded as spoils of war. These weren't just valuable objects anymore. They were symbols of Rome's dominance over the Jewish people and their God. For centuries, these treasures sat in Rome's Temple of Peace, displayed like trophies of conquest. The golden menorah became a tourist attraction, a reminder of Roman power and Jewish defeat. But even Rome's grip on these sacred objects wouldn't last forever. In 410 CE, exactly 8 centuries after the Babylonian conquest, history came full circle. Rome itself was sacked by the Visigoth king Alaric, and among the treasures carried away by these Germanic warriors were, according to the historian Procopius, the treasures of Solomon's temple. Artifacts that had survived the destruction of Jerusalem, the fall of Babylon, the rise and fall of Persia, and the dominance of Rome were now in the hands of barbarian kings. The Visigoths settled in southern France, in the region we now call Languedoc. To this day, local legends speak of ancient Jewish treasures buried in caves and hidden chambers throughout the area. Could it be that somewhere in the French countryside, in some forgotten cavern or sealed vault, lie the golden vessels that once graced Solomon's temple? But the story doesn't end there either. The treasures changed hands again when the Vandals, under their king Genseric, sacked Rome in 455 CE. Procopius tells us that among the items taken were the treasures of the Jews, including the temple menorah, which was carried off to the Vandal capital of Carthage in North Africa. From Jerusalem to Babylon, from Babylon back to Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Rome, from Rome to France, from France to North Africa. These sacred objects had become unwilling travelers, crossing continents and centuries, always just beyond the reach of those who would return them to their rightful place. And here's where our modern investigation begins. Because in recent decades, archaeologists have made discoveries that are revolutionizing our understanding of what really happened to Solomon's treasures. Discoveries that suggest the story we thought we knew might be incomplete. Discoveries that hint at hidden chambers, secret caches, and artifacts that have been waiting in darkness for nearly 3,000 years. The Temple Mount Sifting Project, one of the most significant archaeological endeavors in modern history, has been painstakingly examining soil that was illegally removed from the Temple Mount in 1999. What they've found is changing everything we thought we knew about the Pauks Temple and its treasures. Thousands of artifacts spanning millennia. Ancient coins, pottery fragments, jewelry, and most remarkably, items that date specifically to the First Temple period. Stone vessel fragments that may have held sacred oil. Seals and bulla that belonged to biblical priestly families. Even arrowheads from Nebuchadnezzar's siege. Physical evidence of the very conquest that scattered the temple treasures to the winds. But perhaps most intriguing of all is what they haven't found. Despite sifting through thousands of tons of Temple Mount soil, despite recovering artifacts from virtually every period of Jerusalem's history, they found no trace of the most precious temple treasures, no fragments of the golden menorah, no pieces of the Ark of the Covenant, no remnants of the golden vessels that the Bible describes in such vivid detail. This absence is almost as telling as any discovery could be. It suggests that these items were either completely destroyed, which seems unlikely given their construction from precious metals, or they were removed from the Temple Mount and hidden elsewhere before any of the great conquests occurred. And that possibility opens up a world of speculation that has captured imaginations for generations. Could faithful priests, knowing that destruction was coming, have secreted the most sacred objects away from the temple? Could there be hidden chambers beneath Jerusalem, sealed vaults in the Judean wilderness, or secret caves where the true treasures of Solomon still wait in darkness? The search for these hidden treasures has become one of archaeology's greatest obsessions. From the Ethiopian highlands where the Queen of Sheba's descendants claim to guard the Ark of the Covenant, to the caves near the Dead Sea where the Copper Scroll hints at 64 different treasure locations, to the tunnels beneath the Temple Mount where Jewish tradition insists the Ark was hidden before the Babylonian invasion. Each theory has its adherents, its evidence, and its mysteries. Each possibility opens new questions while answering old ones. And each discovery brings us closer to understanding not just what happened to Solomon's treasures, but what those treasures really represented to the people who created them, worshipped with them, and ultimately lost them. But this is just the beginning of our investigation, because the more we dig into this mystery, the more complex it becomes. The more we uncover about ancient hiding places and secret chambers, the more we realize that the search for Solomon's treasures isn't just about gold and silver. It's about faith, hope, and the human desire to connect with something eternal. In our next episode, we're going to explore the most compelling theories about where these treasures might be hidden today. We'll examine the Ethiopian connection, investigate the Dead Sea Cave theories, and look at the tantalizing evidence that suggests some of the most sacred objects in human history might still be waiting beneath our feet in Jerusalem itself, because the story is far from over. In fact, it might just be beginning. The search for Solomon's lost treasures has drawn some of the most brilliant minds and adventurous spirits of the modern era. But it's also attracted its share of charlatans, conspiracy theorists, and treasure hunters whose enthusiasm far exceeds their scholarly credentials. Separating fact from fiction in this quest requires us to examine each theory with both open minds and critical thinking. Let's start with one of the most persistent and fascinating claims, that the Ark of the Covenant currently resides in Ethiopia, specifically in the ancient city of Aksum. This isn't just a modern theory dreamed up by adventure novelists. It's a belief so deeply embedded in Ethiopian culture and religion that it's written into their constitution and claimed by their Orthodox Church as historical fact. The story goes back centuries, recorded in a text called the Kebra Nagast, or the Glory of the Kings. According to this Ethiopian chronicle, the Queen of Sheba wasn't just a visitor to Solomon's court. She was the mother of his son, Menelik, who would become the founder of the Ethiopian royal dynasty. When Menelik came of age, he traveled to Jerusalem to meet his father. Solomon welcomed him, showered him with gifts, and eventually sent him home with a royal escort. But here's where the story takes its dramatic turn. According to the Kebra Nagast, Menelik's companions, frustrated by their time in Jerusalem and eager to take something of value back to Ethiopia, secretly removed the Ark of the Covenant from the temple and replaced it with a replica. By the time Solomon discovered the theft, it was too late. The real Ark was already on its way to Ethiopia, where it would become the source of that nation's power and the cornerstone of their royal legitimacy. For over 1,000 years, Ethiopian emperors claimed direct descent from this union between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. They called themselves the Solomonic dynasty, and their authority rested not just on political power, but on their supposed guardianship of the world's most sacred relic. Even Haile Selassie, Ethiopia's last emperor, included this biblical connection in the country's official constitution. Today, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintains that the Ark sits in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, guarded by a single monk, who has taken a lifetime vow never to leave the compound and never to allow anyone else to see the relic. This guardian, known as the Keeper of the Ark, is chosen for life and reportedly dies in the presence of the Ark, passing his sacred duty to a successor in his final moments. The Ethiopian claim is compelling in its consistency and longevity. For generations, emperors, priests, and common people have maintained this story with unwavering conviction. They've built their national identity around it. They've structured their religious practices around it. And they've resisted every attempt by outsiders to examine or verify their claims. But here's what makes this theory particularly intriguing from an archaeological perspective. Ethiopia does have ancient connections to the biblical world that are historically documented. The Queen of Sheba is mentioned in multiple biblical texts, and while scholars debate her exact origins, the Ethiopian highlands remain one of the most plausible candidates for her kingdom. Ancient trade routes connected Ethiopia to Jerusalem through the Red Sea and Arabian Peninsula. Cultural exchanges between these regions are well documented in historical records. Moreover, Ethiopian Christianity has preserved traditions and practices that echo ancient Jewish rituals in ways that are found nowhere else in the Christian world. Their religious calendar, their dietary laws, their temple architecture, even their claims to possess other temple artifacts beyond the Ark, all suggest cultural connections that run deeper than typical Christian conversion stories would explain. But skepticism runs deep in the scholarly community. The Kebra Nagast, while culturally significant, was compiled centuries after the events it describes. No contemporary records from Solomon's time mention Menelik or confirm the Queen of Sheba's Ethiopian origins. And the convenient inaccessibility of the supposed Ark makes verification impossible, leading many to dismiss the entire claim as pious legend rather than historical fact. Yet even the skeptics can't fully explain away some curious details. Why would a Christian nation invent a story that portrays their ancestors as thieves who stole from God's temple? Why maintain such an elaborate fiction for over a millennium? And how do we account for the remarkably specific ritual knowledge that Ethiopian priests possess about temple practices that were lost to most of the world after 70 CE? The Ethiopian mystery deepens when we consider the testimony of some Western visitors who claim to have glimpsed something extraordinary in Aksum. While the current guardian allows no one to see the Ark itself, previous guardians have occasionally permitted trusted visitors to observe from a distance. Their descriptions, while lacking scientific verification, are remarkably consistent. They speak of an object covered in gold, roughly the dimensions described in biblical texts, emanating what they describe as an otherworldly presence. But Ethiopia isn't the only location where ancient traditions claim to house temple treasures. The connection between the Dead Sea region and hidden sacred objects has captured archaeological imagination for decades, particularly since the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the mid-20th century. Among these scrolls was one that stood out from all the others. While most scrolls were written on parchment or papyrus, this one was inscribed on copper sheets. Known as the Copper Scroll, it reads like an ancient treasure map, listing 64 different locations where gold, silver, and sacred vessels were supposedly hidden. The quantities described are staggering. Tons of gold and silver scattered across dozens of locations throughout ancient Israel and Jordan. The Copper Scroll mentions specific landmarks, precise measurements, and detailed instructions for locating these caches. But here's what makes it particularly relevant to our investigation. Some scholars believe this scroll specifically describes temple treasures that were hidden before the Roman destruction in 70 CE. The timing fits. The locations match areas where temple priests might have had access, and the quantities align with what we know about the Second Temple's wealth. Explorer and researcher Vendell Jones dedicated much of his life to deciphering the Copper Scroll's locations. He believed the scroll provided clues not just to random treasure hoards, but to a systematic effort by temple priests to preserve sacred objects before the Romans could destroy them. Jones claimed to have located several of the sites described in the scroll, and while he never found the major treasures, he did discover artifacts that suggested ancient human activity in areas that matched the scroll's descriptions. More recently, researcher Jimmy Barfield has claimed to have decoded the scroll's precise locations using advanced geographical analysis and historical research. According to Barfield, the treasures aren't scattered randomly across the landscape but are concentrated in a specific cave system near Jerusalem. He believes this cave contains not just gold and silver, but the Ark of the Covenant itself, along with other sacred vessels from the Second Temple. The Dead Sea Cave theory gains credibility from several factors. First, the region is known for its extensive cave systems, many of which have preserved ancient artifacts for millennia. The dry climate and stable temperatures make it an ideal environment for long-term preservation. Second, the area was accessible to temple priests who would have known about these hiding places from generations of use. Third, the copper scrolls' detailed descriptions suggest intimate knowledge of the terrain that could only come from people who had actually used these locations. But like the Ethiopian theory, the Dead Sea Cave hypothesis faces significant challenges. The copper scrolls' language is archaic and sometimes ambiguous. Many of the landmarks it references have disappeared or changed beyond recognition over 2,000 years. And despite decades of searching by multiple teams, no one has definitively located the major treasure caches it describes. Perhaps most frustratingly, some of the areas mentioned in the scroll are now inaccessible due to political tensions and military restrictions. Caves that might hold the answers to our questions lie in disputed territories where archaeological excavation is impossible. It's entirely possible that the treasures we're seeking are sitting in sealed chambers just beyond our reach, waiting for political circumstances to change before they can be properly investigated. Yet another theory places the temple treasures much closer to their original home. Many rabbinical sources and some archaeological evidence suggest that the most sacred objects never left Jerusalem at all. Instead, they were hidden in secret chambers beneath the Temple Mount itself, sealed away by priests who knew that destruction was imminent, but believed that faithful guardians would eventually return to reclaim them. This theory has powerful support from Jewish tradition. The Talmud contains numerous references to temple treasures being hidden beneath the sanctuary before various conquests. Some sources suggest that King Josiah, anticipating the Babylonian invasion, ordered the Ark and other sacred objects to be concealed in chambers that had been prepared specifically for this purpose. Other traditions claim that the treasures were hidden during the Roman siege, sealed away by priests who died protecting the location of their hiding places. The Temple Mount hiding theory is compelling because it explains several mysteries that other theories struggle to address. Why wasn't the Ark mentioned in Babylonian records? Because it was already hidden before they arrived. Why do some traditions speak of temple treasures surviving multiple destructions? Because they were never actually in the temple when those destructions occurred. Why do certain rabbinical sources speak with such confidence about the treasure's eventual recovery? Because they know exactly where they are. Archaeological evidence for hidden chambers beneath the Temple Mount is surprisingly strong. Ground-penetrating radar has detected voids and cavities in the bedrock that could be natural caves or artificial chambers. Historical accounts describe extensive tunnel systems that connected different parts of the temple complex. And recent discoveries have revealed that the engineering capabilities of ancient builders were far more sophisticated than previously believed. The challenge with investigating this theory is obvious. The Temple Mount is one of the most politically sensitive archaeological sites in the world. It's sacred to three major religions, controlled by Islamic authorities who prohibit excavation, and monitored by multiple governments with competing interests. Even if hidden chambers do exist beneath the dome of the rock, accessing them would require international cooperation on a scale that seems virtually impossible in today's political climate. But here's what makes this theory particularly intriguing. It's the only one that explains why certain Jewish traditions speak of the temple treasures with such certainty about their eventual recovery. If the objects were scattered to distant lands or destroyed by conquering armies, why would ancient sources consistently claim that they remain intact and will one day be restored to their proper place? The confidence of these traditions suggests knowledge rather than hope, fact rather than faith. Recent technological advances have opened new possibilities for investigating these theories without the need for invasive excavation. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and other remote sensing technologies can detect underground anomalies that might indicate hidden chambers or buried objects. Some of these techniques have already been applied to areas around Jerusalem with intriguing results. Thermal imaging has revealed temperature variations in certain cave systems that suggest hidden chambers beyond what's visible to explorers. Magnetometry has detected metallic anomalies in areas that align with some of the Copper Scrolls descriptions. And seismic analysis has identified underground voids that could be either natural caves or human-made chambers. But perhaps the most significant recent development in the search for temple treasures comes from an unexpected source: genetic analysis of artifacts that may have originated in the temple itself. Researchers have begun analyzing organic materials found in ancient vessels and containers, looking for traces of substances that were used specifically in temple rituals. Incense residues, oil traces, and even microscopic fabric fibers could provide clues about an object's origins and authenticity. This scientific approach to treasure hunting represents a fundamental shift in how we investigate these ancient mysteries. Instead of relying solely on historical texts and archaeological excavation, researchers can now use cutting-edge laboratory techniques to verify claims and trace the origins of artifacts that surface in private collections or appear in remote locations. The implications are staggering. If genetic analysis could confirm that certain objects contain substances that were used exclusively in the Jerusalem temple, it would provide the first scientific evidence for the survival of actual temple artifacts. Such discoveries could validate traditional claims, expose modern forgeries, and potentially point researchers toward the locations where other treasures might be hidden. But this technological revolution in archaeology also raises new questions about the ethics and politics of treasure hunting. Who has the right to search for these objects? Who would have the authority to authenticate them if they're found? And what would happen to artifacts that are discovered in territories controlled by governments or religious authorities who might have their own claims to ownership? The search for Solomon's temple treasures isn't just an academic exercise or an adventure story. It's a window into some of the most complex issues facing modern archaeology and international relations. These objects, if they still exist, represent more than just monetary value. They're symbols of religious faith, national identity, and cultural heritage that transcend any single group's claims to ownership. As we continue our investigation, we'll explore how modern technology is being used to test these ancient theories, examine the most promising recent discoveries, and look at what the future might hold for this greatest of archaeological mysteries. Because one thing is certain: the search for Solomon's treasures is far from over, and the next breakthrough might be closer than anyone imagines. The reality is that we're living through a golden age of discovery when it comes to temple archaeology, even if the greatest prizes remain tantalizingly out of reach. Every excavation season brings new revelations. Every technological advancement opens doors that were previously sealed. And every careful analysis of existing evidence reveals patterns that previous generations of researchers simply couldn't see. Consider what we've learned just in the past decade. The Temple Mount Sifting Project alone has revolutionized our understanding of what actually happened on that sacred hill over the centuries. When Islamic authorities illegally removed thousands of tons of soil from beneath the Dome of the Rock in 1999, they inadvertently created the largest archaeological opportunity in Jerusalem's modern history. That soil, dumped unceremoniously in the Kidron Valley, contained artifacts spanning 3,000 years of human history. Teams of volunteers have spent years carefully sifting through this archaeological treasure trove, and what they've found is reshaping everything we thought we knew about the temple periods. Pottery fragments that show continuous habitation during times when some scholars claimed the site was abandoned. Coins that prove international pilgrimage continued even during periods of supposed isolation. Weapon fragments that provide physical evidence of the sieges described in ancient texts. But most significantly for our investigation, they found items that appear to be directly connected to temple operations. Seal impressions from priestly families mentioned in biblical texts. Stone vessel fragments that could only have been used for ritual purification. Even what appears to be a clay token system that pilgrims used to purchase offerings, exactly as described in ancient rabbinic literature. What makes these discoveries so compelling isn't just their individual significance, but the pattern they reveal. This wasn't just a religious site. It was a complex administrative center with sophisticated systems for managing pilgrims, processing offerings, and maintaining ritual purity. The scale of organization required for these operations suggests that the temple treasures weren't just ceremonial objects sitting in storage. They were active components of an intricate religious and economic system. This evidence supports theories that suggest the most valuable temple items weren't simply looted when conquering armies arrived. They were integral parts of ongoing operations that would have been carefully protected and potentially relocated when threats emerged. Priests who managed such complex systems wouldn't have waited for enemies to arrive before securing their most precious assets. Recent discoveries in other parts of Jerusalem have added weight to this interpretation. Excavations in the city of David have revealed extensive tunnel systems that connected different parts of the ancient city. These weren't just water channels or storage areas. They were sophisticated transportation networks that could move people and objects without detection. Some of these tunnels show signs of hasty sealing, as if they were closed off during times of crisis. Underground Jerusalem is far more complex than anyone previously imagined. Researchers using ground-penetrating radar have mapped chamber systems that extend for miles beneath the old city. Some of these spaces are natural caves that were modified by human hands. Others appear to be entirely artificial constructions designed for specific purposes that we can only guess at. What's particularly intriguing is that many of these underground features align with descriptions found in ancient texts that were previously dismissed as legend or metaphor. References to chambers beneath chambers and hiding places prepared by righteous kings suddenly seem less like poetic language and more like architectural descriptions. The technology we're using to explore these possibilities is advancing at breathtaking speed. Archaeologists can now create detailed three-dimensional maps of underground spaces without disturbing a single stone above them. They can analyze microscopic traces of ancient materials and determine not just what they are, but where they originated and how they were used. Some of the most promising research involves chemical analysis of artifacts that might have temple connections. Researchers have identified specific combinations of resins, oils, and metals that were used exclusively in temple rituals. These chemical signatures are like fingerprints that can potentially identify authentic temple objects even when they surface far from Jerusalem. This scientific approach has already produced some startling results. Several artifacts in private collections that were dismissed as modern forgeries have proven to contain ancient materials that match temple period chemistry exactly. Other objects that were considered authentic based on stylistic analysis have been exposed as clever fakes that couldn't pass chemical scrutiny. But perhaps the most significant breakthrough has come from an unexpected direction: climate science. Researchers studying ancient weather patterns have discovered that the periods when temple treasures supposedly disappeared often coincided with severe droughts or other environmental crises that would have forced populations to relocate. This correlation suggests that treasure hiding might have been part of larger survival strategies rather than just responses to military threats. Communities facing extended droughts would have needed to abandon settlements temporarily while preserving their most valuable possessions for eventual recovery. Sacred objects would have been prime candidates for such preservation efforts. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. Many cave systems in the Judean wilderness show signs of organized storage activity during precisely the periods when temple treasures vanished from historical records. These weren't random hiding places chosen in moments of panic. They were carefully prepared repositories designed for long-term preservation. The implications are profound. If temple treasures were hidden as part of systematic preservation efforts, rather than desperate last-minute attempts to escape conquering armies, then their locations might have been carefully documented and passed down through generations of guardians. Such documentation might still exist in forms we haven't yet learned to recognize. Some researchers believe that certain medieval manuscripts contain coded references to treasure locations, disguised as religious texts or historical chronicles. Others think that architectural features in ancient synagogues and churches might preserve directional clues in their decorative elements. Even traditional songs and stories passed down through oral tradition could contain geographic information encoded in seemingly innocent verses. The search for these hidden codes has become a specialized field that combines archaeology, linguistics, computer science, and cultural anthropology. Teams of researchers use pattern recognition software to analyze thousands of ancient texts, looking for recurring phrases or numerical sequences that might indicate location markers. They study architectural elements for mathematical relationships that could encode directional information. They even analyze traditional melodies for rhythmic patterns that might preserve geographic coordinates. This interdisciplinary approach has already yielded some fascinating discoveries. Certain medieval maps show geographic features that don't correspond to known landmarks, but match descriptions found in treasure-related texts. Ancient architectural elements in Jerusalem churches contain geometric patterns that align with specific astronomical events mentioned in treasure chronicles. Traditional folk songs from regions where temple treasures supposedly traveled contain geographical references that correspond to actual cave systems and underground chambers. But even as our investigative capabilities expand, the fundamental challenge remains unchanged. The most promising locations for temple treasures are still in areas where excavation is politically impossible or culturally inappropriate. The Temple Mount itself, where tradition places the most sacred objects, remains off-limits to archaeological investigation. The Ethiopian church that claims to house the Ark of the Covenant refuses to allow scientific examination. Many of the cave systems identified by the Copper Scroll lie in disputed territories where research permits are impossible to obtain. This political reality has forced researchers to develop new strategies for investigation that don't require physical access to sensitive sites. Satellite imaging can detect underground anomalies that suggest hidden chambers. Atmospheric analysis can identify trace gases that might indicate ancient organic materials in sealed spaces. Even social media monitoring can track reports of unusual discoveries in remote areas where traditional archaeological surveys aren't possible. Some of the most intriguing recent leads have come from these unconventional sources. Satellite images have revealed geometric patterns in desert areas that could indicate ancient construction projects. Atmospheric sensors have detected unusual chemical signatures near known cave systems that might suggest the presence of ancient metals or organic materials. Social media posts from hikers and adventurers have reported discoveries of worked stone and metal fragments in areas that align with historical treasure descriptions. Each of these leads requires careful investigation to separate genuine discoveries from natural phenomena or modern intrusions. But the cumulative effect is a growing body of evidence that suggests temple treasures didn't simply vanish into oblivion. They were preserved, protected, and hidden with far more sophistication than previous generations of researchers imagined possible. The question now isn't whether these treasures still exist somewhere, but whether we'll develop the technology and political cooperation necessary to locate and authenticate them. Recent breakthroughs in remote sensing, chemical analysis, and pattern recognition suggest that we're closer to answers than ever before. But the ultimate discoveries may require international collaboration on a scale that transcends current political and religious divisions. What gives me hope is that the search for temple treasures has already brought together researchers from different cultures, religions, and disciplines in ways that seemed impossible just a generation ago. Jewish archaeologists work alongside Christian scholars and Muslim historians, united by their shared fascination with this ancient mystery. Israeli scientists collaborate with Ethiopian researchers, Palestinian academics, and international teams from dozens of countries. This cooperation exists because the temple treasures represent something that transcends any single group's claims to ownership. They're symbols of humanity's earliest attempts to understand the divine, to create beauty worthy of the sacred, and to preserve the most precious elements of culture across generations of upheaval and change. Whether these treasures rest beneath Jerusalem's ancient stones, hidden in Ethiopian highlands, sealed in Dead Sea caves, or scattered across continents by the tides of history, their true value lies not in gold or silver, but in their power to connect us to our ancestors' deepest aspirations. They remind us that every generation faces the challenge of preserving what matters most while adapting to forces beyond their control. The search continues because the questions these treasures raise are as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. How do we protect what's sacred in times of crisis? How do we balance preservation with progress? How do we maintain faith when everything familiar disappears? And how do we pass the most important truths to the next generation when we're not sure we'll survive to teach them ourselves? These are the real treasures hidden in Solomon's story. Not just golden vessels and precious stones, but wisdom about human nature, divine purpose, and the eternal struggle between holding on and letting go. Whether we ever find the physical artifacts or not, the search itself has already revealed treasures that no conquering army can steal and no earthly power can destroy. The mystery of Solomon's temple treasures remains unsolved, but it's no longer unanswered. Every discovery brings new understanding. Every technological advance opens new possibilities. And every generation of searchers adds their own insights to a quest that began when the first faithful guardian sealed the first sacred object away from the first approaching army. The treasures are still out there, waiting. And somewhere, in some hidden chamber or sealed cave or guarded sanctuary, the golden vessels that once held the presence of God Himself continue their patient vigil, preserving not just precious metals, but precious memories of a time when heaven touched earth and humanity reached toward the divine. The search goes on because some treasures are worth any effort, any sacrifice, any amount of time to recover. And the greatest treasure of all might be the journey itself, the dedication it inspires, and the faith it preserves across the centuries.